Hi everyone, my name is Sahar and I'll be your host for this webinar, You've Had a Penetration Test, Now What? Our presenter today is Darren Pyatt. Darren is a TruShield Director of Managed Services and has an extensive background in cybersecurity. After a successful career in the Marine Corps, he went on to hold leadership roles in large MSSPs such as UUNet, Sprint, British Telecom, and HP, where he helped build large-scale global operations before joining TruShield. At the end of the webinar, we will have questions and answers, so don't be afraid to submit any questions you may have. And now I'll hand it over to Darren.
Hi, Sahir. Thank you for the introduction. All of you attending the webinar, thank you for attending. It's a pleasure to be able to share information like this to help each other secure the world. Just a couple of housekeeping items. If you have a question, type the question in the questions box, and we'll answer them at the end of the webinar. If I'm unable to answer immediately, I'll be sure to provide a response once I've verified my answer through some research if needed. If you ask a question during this call, only state your first name to preserve the identity of yourself and the company you represent. Everyone in attendance will be emailed a copy of the recorded webinar. The recorded webinar, as well as the slides, will be available for download on the TruShield website in the resources section at www.trushieldinc.com. So as Sahir said, my experience ranges from starting out in the U.S. military in the Marine Corps. There, I was a drill instructor for a while. I was a weapons coach. I did some time in Bosnia and Somalia, and then I've got 20 years of leadership experience in some of the large MSSPs. What TruShield does is, among penetration testing and vulnerability assessments, that's just a small part of what we do. Some of our core service delivery items are what's stated here in this slide. So let's go on. A penetration test, a pen test, is the same principle as checking all your doors and windows at your house or your car, as an example, to make sure they're secure. Verifying your car or home is secure, reduces the risk that a breach may occur. So this is something that we already do in everyday life, is that we constantly check to make sure everybody's safe and everything around us. What makes it difficult in the cyber world is that the doors and windows of your network live in the virtual world where you can't see them. So it's kind of in a space where if you can't see them, they just plainly don't exist, or you don't know to check. Every network is open to the world. What constitutes the security really is the level of difficulty in penetrating your network. So even though everybody is already vulnerable, it's a matter of the mitigating factors that you put in place to make it more difficult to break in. So if the longer it takes to break in, most likely an attacker is going to move on to somebody else. So just like your house or your network, the likelihood of your house or your car being broken into by somebody in China is extremely low. But the likelihood of your network being broken into by somebody in China is extremely high. And it's seen in a lot of statistics that we're pulling out today, is that a lot of the attacks are coming from China, some are Russia, and things like that. So when we say that your network is open to the world, it's literally open to the world. So the idea is to lock things down as best we can without impeding business. The output of a penetration test allows you to determine how vulnerable you are to exploitation, your overall security posture, along with action items, which leads us up into 6 steps in a penetration test. So believe it or not, the reasoning of doing a penetration test is to find out how vulnerable you are, but there's a little bit of homework that has to be done before the actual penetration test happens. So there are some clients out there that plainly do a penetration test just to get the check in the box for audit reasons. But the true purpose of it is to find out how vulnerable you are, and findings of that helps reduce your overall risk, and it can actually save you a lot of money in continuous improvement processes. So there are 6 major steps leading up to a successful penetration test. The penetration test is usually the step that creates the trust between a client and a sound MSSP. So you want to understand the product value of the data in your network and what level of responsibility you have to the public with personal data. So this is step 2. So understanding the real value of everything that you have and understanding the mission of the company that you work for, what of the devices that you have, what is it that's delivering critical, valuable information that's contributing to your bottom line and your revenue stream. Determining the risk value of each device. So what is the confidentiality level of the data on the resource? If the data was stolen, could it cause damage or financial loss to your business, the public, or partnering businesses? So we do business every day where there are partnering businesses that have to have access to your business. It's important to understand the vulnerability of the partnering business before they connect to you as well. The integrity is the data on the resource unaltered, or is it corrupt, or is it able to be accessed and modified? And the availability is what is the tolerable downtime of the resource before you realize a financial loss. Step 4, this is where you determine how the users behave on your network. What are they allowed to use? What are they allowed to have access to in order to do their jobs? Everything that's left open should be questioned or verified if it's being abused by inside users. So step 5, in leading up to a pen test, this is where you determine what is allowed to leave your network. Is your network reachable from the outside? If so, how is it reachable? So it's possible that you're doing business inside your network, or people are allowed to come inside your network, but you have to understand what it is that they're allowed to have access to and tighten down that entrance only to what you want available. Step 6 is who is allowed in and out of your network, and this is basically tightened down by limiting the IP addresses that are allowed in and out. Anybody that doesn't do business with you shouldn't be given access in, or otherwise it's basically a welcome mat to allow them in. Okay. And the next thing is the actual pen test. So conducting the pen test or the vulnerability assessment, if you remember back at the beginning when I first started speaking, this is where you're actually checking the doors and the windows of your network. The pen test, there's 2 different types of, I don't want to say 2 types of pen tests, but there's a pen test and a vulnerability assessment. A pen test is where we take the approach where we test just as a hacker would and exploit vulnerabilities. And a vulnerability assessment is we identify vulnerabilities and what could be exploited without actually exploiting it. So the vulnerability assessment is more of a hypothetical security assessment on what could be compromised, whereas a pen test is we find a vulnerability and we actually penetrate it to prove that the theory is actually true. Once the pen test is complete, you would receive an exhaustive pen test findings, and what this comes with is it has weighted values of the vulnerabilities that are found, how an intruder could exploit the vulnerabilities, and explore the mitigating factors that are the quickest and most cost-effective. So this leads us to the real subject of this webinar, and it's what to do after the pen test. So what are the success criteria that leads up to what to do afterwards? Step 1, as an example, in a recent penetration test we did for a client, we found, and this was a new client that we brought in. In their penetration test, we found 257 serious vulnerabilities, 1,404 high vulnerabilities, 870 medium vulnerabilities, 14,448 low vulnerabilities, and 3,911 informational items. Each of these are categorized so that it helps prioritize mitigating factors against known risks that you identified in the first 6 steps of leading up to a pen test. Step 2 is measuring each vulnerability and how it impacts the business from a financial perspective. If a finding is critical, so if critical vulnerability X were exploited, what damage would it cause to the business, both in a monetary value and a loss of reputation? So it's not the ability to hack into a machine is always there. The question is how difficult is it to penetrate that device? And then once somebody is in, what is the real value, or what is the loss in damages that could be caused by having access to that box? So it's not can they get in, but is what are the negative effects to the business if they get in? And that's how you determine the criticality and the prioritization of mitigating some of the critical assets or the critical findings. So you want to tackle the critical findings first, and once you have compared your critical findings to your risks or the value of the assets that are inside your business, this is a great opportunity to create new business objectives and knocking down business vulnerabilities. And this will have an overall effect on both securing your company and lowering the cost of operations across the company, making it more profitable. So you're basically doing loss prevention, which leads back into positive addition back into your cash flow. And it plays a hand-in-hand progress in your continuous improvement efforts. So in step 4, as we stated before, prioritize your risks according to the business needs, and then categorizing those critical findings against that is what will help you prioritize what needs to be fixed first. And these are things that we could help with along the way. Step 5 is define your objectives to reduce risk and lower cost of operations. Like I was saying a few minutes ago, taking those critical vulnerabilities and prioritizing them and bridging the gap of the risks. So the idea is to find a mitigating factor that is less expensive, it's efficient, and it creates a more efficient process flow within the company. So you want it to create the idea of implementing security is to enable successful business and be profitable. The idea of security isn't to make business more difficult. It's actually to help you be more profitable in a secure manner. Step 6 is changing the rules of engagement and training your employees. So making changes from a critical, tackling those critical and serious vulnerabilities up front is going to change processes and how things work inside the company. And this is where good training with the employees, when they click on something that's an unknown link that results in going to downloading an executable that installs malware inside your network. So educating your employees to figure out what can cause harm, and because of the changes that you're making, to create efficiencies, how does that affect process flow within their own groups? So MSS is one of our core services we provide. And in step 7, this is about implementing a continuous security monitoring plan for exploitation attempts. So this is where we can monitor your events that are happening inside and out of your network and how they correlate to the risk findings or the vulnerability findings in your assessment. As things are being monitored and alerted, this gives you a real-time approach at mitigating issues that are happening at this very moment. It gives you a chance to put real fixes in place. And then the idea of this is in about 3 to 6 months later, you want to do another pen test or a vulnerability assessment to see, it's basically to grade how you're doing in implementing mitigating factors against the last pen test that was done. So the idea is to create a secure environment. Your environment should be more efficient, and you should be able to be more profitable while you're doing business in a more efficient manner. Okay, and the last slide. So restate again, these are, even though vulnerability assessment and penetration testing is a small part of what we do, it is the process that helps build a good trusting relationship between a client and a solid MSS. And as we complete vulnerability assessments and penetration testing, some of the other services that come into play, as in the managed security monitoring, things like that. So, and we can also help with the mitigating steps in securing your environment. And with that, this is the end of our webinar, except for questions and answers. And I hope I've been able to cover some quality information for you. So if there are any questions at all, the floor is open. Okay, a question from Brad. How often should you have a pen test? The initial pen test should be done, if you've never had one, you should definitely schedule one. But the idea, what most companies do is they work through a quarterly cycle, some a monthly cycle. But the idea is to do a penetration test, create objectives around locking down some of the findings, and then you do another pen test to figure out how you've closed the gap. So if you've had 40 critical vulnerabilities this time, you should have much fewer in the next go-around. So in the next month or the next quarter, depending on how many findings were found and how open you are to the world, really. I hope that answers your question. Okay, that was a good question. If there's any more questions, I will wait about another minute, and then we'll go ahead and end this webinar. So if you have any questions at all, don't be afraid to ask. So we've got another question. How long should a pen test last? Depending on the size of a business, it can take anywhere between a couple of days to actually a couple of weeks to get finished. And then once the penetration test is complete, all that information has to be boiled down so that we can communicate the risks and vulnerabilities to you. Another question, how long does a penetration test take? That's pretty much the same question that was just answered, so thank you. Another question, should you switch vendors for a pen test? To be honest, this is a great way to test the abilities of your current vendor. So I would say absolutely. It's easy to get tied into and be comfortable with a current vendor, but it's definitely good to reach out and experience the quality of service that another can provide. like I said earlier, the pen test and the vulnerability assessment is actually what builds a new trusting relationship with a new vendor. So it's a really good first step. All right, if there are no more questions, we're going to go ahead and end the webinar. Thank you for attending, and I hope to hear from you soon. If you want any further information, please go to www.TruShieldInc.com, and we'll see you there. All right, thank you very much.